Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Forward 50. I'm Jodi Rudoren. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Forward, and I'm so excited to have many of you back or have newcomers to our weekly program highlighting members of the Forward 50 of 2020, some of the most interesting, influential, inspirational American Jews. We have brought them together for weekly conversations about whatever's on their mind, their work, the news, challenges of COVID, how the Jewish world is changing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As you come in, I'd love for you to post in the chat where you're coming from, whether that be geographically or in terms of an organization you work with or some Jewish group, how you connect to the Forward. Or many of you may be relatives or friends of some of our panelists. And if you're that, please give us a shout out there too. I am going to introduce the panelists in just a second. Once again, I'm Jodi Rudoren. I'm editor-in-chief of The Forward. And we are actually also live on Facebook if you want to share with your followers. You can go to our Facebook page. Gabby will actually put the link in the chat soon. Please feel free to use the chat to comment on anything that you're hearing. Please post to all panelists and attendees. Right now, I see a lot of you are posting just to panelists, but we want you to post to all panelists and attendees. That will make sure that the whole audience gets to see what you're saying. If you have a question just for the panelists and that you want me to ask them live in our conversation, you should use the Q&A button, which is on the bottom of your screen, but not the chat button. It's on the bottom of the screen if you're on a laptop, and it's on the left if you're on a tablet or phone. And one more bit of tachlis, just to anticipate a question you might have, which is, yes, you will receive a recording of this talk in your email, along with a discount subscription to the Forward. And we hope you'll share and both of those things with your friends and come back to our future events. So I think we've got most people are still rolling in. Feel free to post in the chat where you're coming from to all panelists and attendees. And I'm going to start by introducing our very diverse and panel that comes from totally different parts of the Jewish landscape and has totally different experiences that they're going to share with us. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation. First up, we have Ellie Klein Goldman, who many of you may know as one half of the previously anonymous Twitter account at Rogue Shoal. She was also the executive director of Temple Shalom in Newton, Massachusetts until yesterday when she left that job to start with her partner at Rogue Shoal, a new consulting group called Real Time Strategy Group that I believe is building on the success of Rogue Shoal kind of helping synagogues be better at what they do. And we'll hear more about that from Ellie in a minute. Then we also have Jacob Jonas, who is a choreographer and founder of Jacob Jonas, the company, a dance company. He is a true polymath, and he is an artistic director, choreographer, teacher, and dancer, and also a photographer, filmmaker, producer, and curator. He is coming to us from Los Angeles, where we will be very jealous when he shows you his, I believe, rooftop deck, where he is sitting in beautiful weather. So if you are like me on the East Coast and having like week 3 of endless snow, you can salivate over that. Next, we have Christa Whitney, who is the director of the Yiddish Book Center's Wexler Oral History Project. And I should say that, and because I realized I was in my introduction talking about the Forward 50 as the influential American Jews. That is what it is usually. One of the core criteria is to be Jewish. And I made a mistake and put Christa on the list because of her impact on our landscape last year, but she is not in fact Jewish. And she will talk a little bit about what it's like to work in the Yiddish world despite that identity, or maybe because of that identity. The Oral History Project she runs is a collection of more than 1,000 in-depth video interviews about Yiddish language and culture. They are with people of all ages and backgrounds. She's originally from Northern California. She normally lives in Northampton, Massachusetts. She is now right now in Quincy, Massachusetts, and is also pursuing her MBA. And last but not least, we have Ariel Zwang, who last year became the very first woman to head the Joint Distribution Committee, which is one of the most important and oldest organizations in the Jewish landscape. It's a humanitarian organization, and she actually just took over. She was appointed in 2020, just took over in January. Before that, Ariel led Safe Horizon, which is a social service agency that has a staff of 1,000 people and $100 million budget, and did work that impact 250,000 vulnerable people every year. So she comes from a family of rabbis and Jewish educators, and is one of precious few female CEOs running big Jewish organizations. So we will talk to her some about that. Thanks again for putting all of your notes in the chat. It's great to see people coming from so many places, and Portugal I see, and Ardmore, PA, and I see Ariel's college classmate. So we're thrilled to have all of you. It's great to be here. I'm gonna just give each of you, I've just given that bio intros, which I really hate doing because they're so often impersonal. I'm now gonna ask each of you to kind of talk about yourselves and your work and your year, your 2020, and what it is that got you here, even though you may not know, but you sort of know. So Ellie, I'm going to start with you. And it's so interesting to talk to you on day 2 of your next chapter, but I'm really interested in this. You had 2 big life changes, essentially, besides all the life changes we all had, right? But you started this thing, totally anonymous, went viral. Then you decided to come out and to create this new business. So talk to us a little bit about At Rogue Shoal and that evolution from why you started it, why you think it caught on, and why you decided to switch it up.
Sure. Rogue Shoal started as an anonymous Twitter account in the spring of 2019. And my business partner, Caroline Dorn, and I were finding an outlet for the humor of the weird work that is being a synagogue professional. It is quirky and unusual. And honestly, we thought we were the only kind of ones who lived it. And initially, when we would get 2 or 3 likes on this Twitter account and we had 25 followers, it was a very, very big deal. And when we hit 200, we thought we had every Jew on Twitter, and that was kind of going to be the pinnacle. And then over the course of a year and a half, it just resonated with people. And we started to see emerging a little bit of snark and a little bit of camaraderie and a lot of connection between people on this humorous parody Twitter account. And I think for me, one of the shocks was that I needed that even maybe more than the people for whom it was resonating, to feel that the work is so isolating, that we weren't actually isolated, that the jokes were communal and warm and a little sharp and a little insider was just fantastic. And then the pandemic happened. And not only were people feeling isolated in their work, but physically isolated. And I think through that, and Caroline and I worked together at a synagogue, we realized that actually the fun that we were having in the community that we were building, we wanted it to be our work. And maybe that would have happened over time anyway, but I think the pandemic did accelerate it. And so over the summer, we decided that we would have a go at it and see if we could bring our vision of the work, our perspective to people in real life. And when that started to take off, it was very clear that coming out as Rogue Shoal and being us was what made the most sense. It was very complicated to kind of maintain 2 voices
What's
simultaneously.
The core idea of the business now?
So we work with synagogues, supporting them in a variety of different areas as consultants. Some of it is around staff communication and culture change and direct support for their ED or program manager or membership person. Some of it is data analysis. Some of it is efficiency. Synagogues are weird places where your clients are also being held in spiritual need. And it is just different than other kinds of work, I think. And so what we hope to do is come to a synagogue staff and say, we want to help you do your best work.
Great. Jacob, I'm going to turn to you now. I was just recently over the weekend looking back at some stuff that I wrote like that first week of March, and I saw, Broadway shut down, NCAA shut down, and it's just for performers, for live performers like you, this thing was completely disruptive. I've talked to so many artists who it's like everything they had planned for 2020 was just like wiped off the map in kind of one fell swoop. And you pretty quickly rejected that idea and put on this very amazing performance in a parking lot. Was it at the airport? I can't remember now. Was it at the airport? And I just want to hear you tell first that story of like, how did the light bulb go off to say, I can actually still do a live performance? There's a way. Because I think you were way ahead of a lot of, it was before the Biden car rallies, right? And then kind of tell us about what happened after, what the rest of your year kind of looked like and how you balanced what you used to do with new ways of doing it.
Absolutely. And thanks for having me here. Super honored. Echoing what Ellie was saying about spiritual need, I definitely resonate with that. I think in the arts, so often people think about arts and it's for audiences, but so often it's for the artists themselves. I think for us as dancers, the creative process of actually rehearsing and working together and developing a process is so much more fulfilling than doing that one show for the audience. Not to say that doing a show for an audience isn't fulfilling, but that spiritual need. And I think this time has been very fascinating to realize that just because theaters are closed or, you know, there's a lot of unemployment within the arts, that the reason why we all kind of got it in the first place was to do what you love, and there's like kind of no way out of it, whether it be for a paycheck or anything. And so that energy quickly came behind us. A little bit of a background and a reason why we did the project. When the pandemic first happened, and I think Coachella closed down first, and then the NBA, those were two pretty big events where we realized everything shutting down. And a lot of, we position ourselves as leaders within the medium. And I mean that less in terms of what we do creatively, but more just as activists for the medium, to try to make sure that dance is visible and valued as an art form, and that parents whose kids tell them they want to be dancers or artists, that they feel more encouraged by seeing the work that we do, as opposed to discouraged and say, go be pre-law or pre-med. So we've always been pretty strong activists within the community, and a lot of leaders and thought leaders within dance and the arts kind of started knocking on our doors, because we've always taken digital and social media pretty seriously. You know, we started immediately trying to find community projects that would bring people together, and this idea just came to me to make a show where about 40 cars get together, they form a circle, they turn on their headlights, and everyone stays in their cars, everyone's wearing masks, and we do a show safely. And yeah, we did it in early May. I think we were the first kind of really dance company in the world to do something of that scale. It was a fully produced 1 hour show. I made it all in a parking lot, and all the dancers kind of did it. And we got together, and it ended up working, which was really exciting. We did it in the Santa Monica airport. But yeah, separately from that, I grew up as a street performer in Venice Beach, and started kind of street performing, doing acrobatics, popping, being mentored by different buskers. And yeah, I just got into choreography and just kind of self-taught. And then, yeah, since then, we've been producing a film series, just kind of continuing that idea of community and visibility for dance. We initiated a film series. We've produced 15 short films in the second half of the year, from about summer to December. And it's a global project. So we made a film in Shanghai, one in Nigeria, one in Brazil, Montreal, Amsterdam, and it culminated in 15 short films. And we partnered with some local theaters. And now we're releasing a new film every week as a premiere. And all the films are really themed around non-traditional collaborations. So pairing dancers and choreographers who had never worked together before, and having them meet on Zoom and be through a choreographic process, and finding composers and filmmakers to interpret the work physically. So just trying to keep people, I guess, spiritually engaged.
I love that. If you have links to the films or where people can see them, if you'll put that in the chat, I think that would be great. It's so interesting to me too, because I feel like with art is really interesting. One of the things that's also true, right, is there's so much less going on, that I think people who want to do stuff are more available, right? Like, and I've seen so many interesting, starting with last year, the Saturday Night Seder, which got, this kind of huge celebrities, and, you got the sense that people who, exactly what you said, just needed to make stuff, make art. And that was really moving for a lot of the consumers. Christa, one of the other things that we've been hearing about from a lot of corners is the ways that during the pandemic, there's been this kind of boon in interest in Yiddish. YIVO has had this like huge outpouring for its online series. We've got a new series called Yiddish Word of the Day on YouTube that people are flocking to. And I think that you have also seen a lot of interest in your work. So can you talk a little bit about what you think that's about and how you've responded to it, and what the work at the Book Center has been like this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an exciting time for Yiddish. I feel like the people who, Yiddish speakers and people working in the Yiddish cultural world have always known that Yiddish is a really rich source, and so it's been really exciting to see people in their quarantine projects, including learning Yiddish among something that maybe they've always wanted to do but put off. And certainly, I think for many, the Yiddish Book Center is sort of an in-between organization in many ways, part archive, part museum. And I think similar organizations have seen this too, just the way that public programs have, for us, we're in Western Massachusetts. We don't necessarily get huge audiences in our in-person programs. And so having online programs has been a really amazing opportunity. And I think also sort of symbolic of the Yiddish world, I've spent the last 7 to 10 years traveling really all over the world, collecting Yiddish stories. And here we are in this, digital reality where, this this international network and community can come together in these Zoom and virtual spaces. So in that way, it's really exciting. And then, my work at the Yiddish Book Center is on the Wexel Oral History Project, and 2020 was a pretty big year for us. We recorded our 1,000th interview really right before, one of our last in-person interviews. And then we figured out how to start doing interviews remotely. And we also finished a pretty big 3-year project from the National Endowment for the Humanities, grant funded, to enhance access to our collection. And that really we're excited to see the ways that will open up the archive to new projects. And then we also, we finished up our first feature-length documentary film, which is sort of just coming out, and I hope will come to a Jewish film festival near all of you in the audience. So yeah, along with all the hardships, some highs there too.
I know for me, when I came to work at the Forward a little over a year ago, I was quite surprised to discover something that everyone had known for a long time, which was that there was a huge interest in Yiddish among young people. I think a lot of us expect, and here you are, obviously a young person. I did not know, I think you're not what people necessarily expect. And so I wonder, like, can you talk about why Yiddish for you, and what you think is going on with the kind of, it's not like a renaissance right now, because I have this, I think for a couple decades at least, or generations of 20 somethings, it has been a thing for cool young people to do, but why? and just talk personally about how you got into it.
Yeah, I mean, 40 years ago, Aaron Lansky was a 20-something starting the Yiddish Book Center. So I think there has been this sort of burgeoning interest of young people. And, part of my work has been actually documenting this over the last 10 years. And so there, of course, lots of different answers. I think but for me personally, I came to Yiddish through the study of history and literature. Originally through Holocaust studies. I was introduced to Yiddish literature of the Holocaust, and then really just discovered this whole world of Yiddish literature, and then Yiddish culture. And it really felt like, and I've heard other people say this too, sort of stumbling on this world that I didn't know was there. And it's exciting because, it's not as well known in the mainstream. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And, I'm also not the only non-Jew in this world. I mean, I studied, I think, especially in Eastern Europe, there's a growing interest in Yiddish. And I think that's an exciting thing for Yiddish, that it's not, it's a big deal in the Jewish world, but also it's a world culture that and Jewish culture is can be of interest to anyone.
Thank you. Ariel, I'm going to turn to you now. And if you want to answer in Yiddish, you're welcome to. I don't know if that's you and Joe Biden can speak some Yiddish.
I'm sure he speaks more of it than I do.
Me too. So you were one of the people who readers nominated for the Forward 50. I'm proud that we always try to ask readers to nominate people. And we picked, I think, about a dozen people for the list who were from readers nominated, and the nominator really was highlighting the fact that you as a female chief executive of a huge Jewish organization. And I'm interested in, I guess, two things. I mean, first of all, if I understand correctly, Safe Horizons is not a particularly Jewish organization, right? So you made a choice to come into the Jewish nonprofit world from mainstream secular nonprofit work. So I'm interested in why you wanted to do that, and also how you have been thinking about, and you've been a female CEO for a while, but how you've been thinking about being a woman in this position when amid a pretty live conversation over the last 2 or 3 years in the Jewish world about the lack of women leading our biggest organizations, and the fact that women who do lead organizations tend to be called the executive director and not CEO, and various things like that. I just would love you to talk about those two aspects of this big change for you.
Well, that's a lot. And yes, I'll start by just briefly describing what JDC is and does, and then I'll explain why I was so excited to come there. JDC is about 107 years old and is the organization, it's the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, that has performed miracles for the Jewish people for 107 years, from helping people in the Yishuv who were starving, to the Holocaust, to Operation Solomon, and those who are starving also now as their economies collapse in various places around the world through COVID. And we also are very, very deeply enmeshed, part of the fabric of Israeli society, helping the government there to use human service programs that are research informed and really make society better. And I have to say, it's an honor to be here. There are a number of JDC board members on. Hello to, I see my 97-year-old Uncle Irving is on. So to relatives, friends, fellow B'nai Jeshurun members, and colleagues as well. How did I get to JDC, and what's my career been to date? Well, as my Uncle Irving will tell you, his parents, my great-grandparents, came over, and all of my grandparents came in the early part of this century. They left behind loved ones that they would never see again, and they did that all so that I might lead the life that I do lead. I wasn't born for 50 or 60 years after that, but I was very mindful of that. And, I had one grandfather became a rabbi, and my grandmother's life's work was as a rebbitzin. My other grandfather was a kosher butcher in Newark, New Jersey, and my grandmother worked with him in the store. And there was I, 2 generations later. I could do anything that I wanted. I had all the choices in the world. I didn't have to worry about putting food on the table. And I should add that my grandparents came over with nothing. It's not that they came in a privileged way. And what I realized is that I had benefited so greatly, not only from economic opportunity, but freedom of thought, freedom of choice, all the things that America had provided to me. And it seemed very important to me to help others get access to those things as well. So for 30 years, I've been working with people and communities that don't have enough. And as you said, Jodi, for 20 years, I actually have been a CEO, 12 years at Safe Horizon, which works with victims of crime and abuse. Before that, 7.5 years at New York Cares, which deploys 40,000 volunteers every year in New York. At the same time, my own family, I have 2 girls, they're 23 and 19. I'm the product of day school, so are they, Jewish camps, I'm on the board of my synagogue. My whole life was steeped in the Jewish community from birth. And from the time that I could make those choices myself. And so coming to JDC, where we literally work with the most vulnerable people in the whole world, primarily Jews, but not only Jews, was for me the opportunity to marry those two things, my lifelong engagement as a Jew in the world, and my professional life in helping people who don't have the things that every human being should have. So all I can say is, they talk about actors, get discovered overnight. What does it feel like to be discovered overnight? And the actors say, well, it feels like I've been working for the last 20 years to get discovered overnight. And similarly, I've been doing this job for 20 years. And so it doesn't feel weird or different to me to be a woman as a CEO of a human service organization. And also, it's a way that JDC also continues to lead the field. JDC was committed to having someone with, the kind of human service experience that could help the organization move forward. And to their credit, also considered looking people who, someone like me with the Yiddish and neshama, a Jewish soul and a Jewish life, but who hadn't necessarily grown up in the Jewish communal world. And all I can say is I look forward to a lot of sisters joining me around the table for the Council of Presidents in the future.
Right. Well, a lot of that resonates with me. My father was a kosher butcher, and I too left the New York Times feeling like I could combine my professional love with my, some of what matters to me personally in the Jewish world. So I hear a lot of what you're saying. So here we are, Tuesday. Thursday night is Purim, and it's really, I feel like it's this, holidays are just, they make us think, right, about the passage of time. And, last Purim for a lot of us was the last time we gathered Jewishly in groups. It also was clearly a spreader event in a lot of communities. And now, and we had an article this week that I was really intrigued by, of Purims, of like the dual meaning of masks this Purim. We've actually all been wearing masks, and now we're suddenly have a costume opportunity. And and it's also happening at this time. We just passed this very difficult milestone yesterday with 500,000 deaths. Joe Biden's response to that last night. And yet the vaccines are picking up and things are opening up a little bit. I just heard about somebody making plans to go visit their grandchildren for Passover. So I just wonder how each of you are kind of either what are you doing this week for Purim, and how does it feel different than any other Purim? Or how are you reflecting on these milestones, that coming up on a year of lockdown, 500,000 dead? And whoever wants to start can start, and then we can jump around. Or I can call on you.
I remember.
Maybe Ellie can start and tell us about it, what you know about how synagogues are
yeah.
this year.
So our building closed immediately after Purim, and then we were really out of it for a while. And I came back, I think in late June or July for the first time, and was immediately struck that Purim was still set up. This bins of schwach and the decorations and the signs were all there, and it was like time had stood still. And eventually people did start to come back in, and at some point before the Chagim, I think we managed to clean up Purim. But I don't think I will ever forget that. It was really this moment of returning to the building and realizing what COVID had stopped for us. And this year, everything, I think for most congregations, is online, and people have been very innovative and very creative. And I think more people are baking hamantaschen at home with their kids and worrying less about racing out the door to make it to the carnival on time. And all of the things that our community has done all year to bring the essence of the holidays is happening, and that's great. And I think Purim is a really complicated holiday, period. It is dark and multi-layered, and the characters that are lifted up as heroes are kind of challenging as heroes. And we as a people put a happy face on it and make it a time of celebration, even as we are like commanded to hear the whole story. We are asked to hear it in its darkness and asked to be celebratory. And for me, I don't think that ever resonated as much as it does now.
Yeah,
is-
and you mentioned Purim carnivals. I just realized, like, I wonder if the world is going to be overpopulated with goldfish because of the lack of Purim carnivals this year. So just another reminder, if you have a comment that you want to share with everyone, send it to all panelists and attendees. We're getting a lot of comments that are not intended for us, that are only going to us, and I feel bad about it. So please share with your fellow audience members. Jacob, were you about to talk about Purim? I got a sense that you were either getting ready to dance or talk.
I was just enjoying the goldfish comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting, just kind of all Jewish gatherings over the past year, and just community gatherings, family gatherings, how we've had to break tradition in a lot of ways and form new pathways into that sense of community. I know a lot of organizations in our field, and just any kind of grouping or company or organization that has really formed community has really had to rethink how to bring people together. It's exciting just to see all the panelists here just typing in and sharing ideas. But it's been quite an interesting time to figure out how to still maintain that sense of like togetherness during this time.
Christa, I know you posted in the chat about what the Book Center had put together from its collection about Purim. Can you tell us any of the highlights from in there? I don't know if you've looked at them yourself.
Sure. Yeah, it's a fun, we love putting together, highlights, because at this point, with over 1,000 interviews, and, each one of those has several little highlight clips we make. Ellie, what you were saying is making me think about just the ganze Megillah, like the whole story. And that really resonates to me as an oral historian, because, we do these really in-depth interviews that are one or 2 hours long with people. We have this huge archive with all these over so many hundreds of hours of content. And yet, the work, I think what I've been realizing as now I become a filmmaker, and as well, is that it's, the archive is really important, and getting the stories out of the archive is just as important. And so, for example, that page that we have, it includes highlights that are like 1 to 2 minutes long from some of my favorite interviews, from a woman who grew up in pre-war Vilna, and she's talking about what Purim was like for her in pre-war Vilna, to the first celebration of Purim in a DP camp after the war, to, someone mentioned Folkspina in the chat, and they put on the famous Itzik Munger version of the Megillah story. So I think, how can we increase our attention span to listen to the whole story sometimes, and at the same time understanding that people have shorter attention spans, and maybe we need to serve them, these like Hamantaschen size stories sometimes too.
I love that, Christa. It's a good, it's really a good note for us in digital media, and thinking about different ways of storytelling, and that the most important thing is like that connection you make with somebody. And it relates so much also to the challenges of synagogue life, right? If, you can have if people don't like what, if it's not accessible, if people aren't connecting to it, then it doesn't matter how good or interesting it is. Although the idea that sometimes you do need the ganze Megillah is also really interesting. Ariel, what are you doing for Purim?
I've been thinking about this question from both a personal and a more global perspective. Personally, I never baked Hamantaschen, and I think we were all happier that way. But I always did a very significant mishloach manot process with my daughters, and my younger daughter would make a drawing, then we would put in them, and then of course there was the whole Purim spiel thing. And I have to say, I'm actually okay with skipping that this year. It's okay, because it's a lot, and so focusing on what matters, I think, not that those things don't matter, because they're joy and delight and ways for us to be together, and I can't wait to do it next year. But I've been reflecting also on the ingenuity of the Jewish people that was required for our survival all these millennia, and how even though Zoom is tiring and we're tired of it, yes, and also Zoom allows me to be in shul together with my parents who are 2 hours away. And Zoom allows JDC to help an 80-year-old pensioner in the Ukraine to actually be at a Megillah reading, at her local Megillah reading, because we've provided the smartphone and the training for how to use it and the communal infrastructure to do that. So I'm also reminded of just the constant of change for the Jewish people over all of our lifetime. And that's been accelerating in the last year for sure, but also in a lot of ways that I hope will have honestly lasting benefits too.
Yeah, I have to say, on Mishloach Manot, I want to say, so my mom created this incredibly ambitious fundraiser, Mishloach Manot, of like communal Mishloach Manot that everybody in the Newton Brookline area knows about, I think. She raised more than $1 million for her synagogue over like 35 years of doing it, retired. This was her second Purim not doing it. Anyway, but growing up with that as like this major event in our life, so Mishloach Manot has always been really important for me. My synagogue here does a very basic version of what my mom did, and I somehow missed the deadline this year. So we decided to do our homemade ones this weekend. And we made some hamantash and we wore gloves as we put them together to be like super careful. And when we drove, I have to say, it was so interesting driving around and delivering them because first of all, everybody was home. We knew everyone was home. And the surprise and delight, like the extent to which just this very simple act of giving a paper bag full of goodies, it's like we are, I do think we have gotten a much bigger value on any point of human connection. This is, my daughter's at the door with her mask, handing over the thing through the door, but it's like just seeing each, I don't know, I just got this outpouring of texts and surprise and delight from our few friends that we did this with. And so I do, and for me, a theme throughout this whole thing has been this getting at the essence of it. And I love, Jacob, I'd love you to talk more about what you started to say when you were talking about, you know, this understanding of the art, the way the art works for the artist. And then I just feel like you've gone through, and maybe art is always like this, but you've gone through some of this process of stripping to the essentials, right? What was it really about? And then finding ways to make art about that, the essential thing that we can't give up, and whether or not it's going to be commercially viable, whether it's not, it's going to be, you know, and I don't know if you want to have anything more to say on that subject, but I'm interested in how it pertains to the art making.
Totally. Just to ask the question back, art for the artists, or kind of where we think the arts will go?
The idea of like figuring out what's the essential essence, the essence of the thing, right? That you've been stripping things down.
I mean, it's interesting because I feel like in terms of necessity, right? I think a lot about the value of being an artist so often because, you know, I grew up in a school system where I was put in like, you know, special ed because I had poor reading comprehension skills, and just like a lot of these things that systems put into you of like not feeling value or worthy of creativity or individualism, I think have always been themes of mine, of just kind of this rebellious nature. I think that was why we did Parked, is like, how do you be rebellious against the rules? But I think it's been funny and interesting, you know, just thinking about climate change and global warming and this pandemic. The things that people need most right now are art. They need film and music and technology. They need creativity, and they also need science. And it's interesting, I've talked with a lot of scientists over the years, and they equally too feel this lack of value, you know, being scientists in certain capacities, not all. And I think this necessity to problem solve, and this necessity to think differently, you know, I think a lot of us become, I think I talk too broadly sometimes, but this idea of like, what is a formality? What is formal in terms of ways of doing things? And then how do we break those formalities and think non-traditionally? And I think, you know, I've always been an artist selfishly first, as a means of like really building community and family, like togetherness. The artists in my company tend to be people that, you know, come from broken homes or didn't have the strongest relationships within their communities or their families. And so we bring that sense of family to them. I think the audiences feel that as well. But Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people moving forward out of this in terms of like the commercial element of it. How will Broadway open? How will the theaters open again? How will these things happen? I think people crave culture. There's a balance of safety and health for sure. And I think we're all going to be patient till we find that answer. But I think that need to be creative is explosive, and it will never go away. And I think it's what makes people human. You know, I think when anyone could talk about a story, all the stories we're talking about within Judaism, but even with films, like we've all cried, we've all felt those like raw human emotions. And I think that need to be vulnerable is kind of, I guess, the pursuit that we're all on, is like how to connect and share those vulnerabilities.
So building right off of that, we have a great question from the audience. I think from Nina McGillnick, who really maybe should take my job as moderator, because this is the brilliant question that I did not think to ask. But she says, Nina says, thinking about the 4 people on our panel, the notion of life's essentials come to mind: art, literature, spirituality, and the core supports for living, like food and shelter. I love that that's what I love Nina's definition. And she says, I wonder if you think the world post-COVID will still value these pillars. And it's interesting because for sure, maybe more value on the food and anyway, discuss. Who wants to start with that one? I just think it's really interesting.
I think what we have found is that people are much more aware of what feeds them. And literally, and what oneself or family requires in order to be cared for, and also what feeds them emotionally or culturally. And for everybody, there's a different mix of all of that, but not only do I not think those things are going away, I think we're going to eventually come out of this with a much different sense of what is essential and what feeds us and makes us full and whole.
I guess I can say that I think that both as it relates to the clients of JDC, those we help, and also I think of it as just an organizational manager that and as the mom of millennials who are on their phones all the time, that I think the abiding lesson is how important our human connections are, IRL, in real life, as the whippersnappers say, and that technology enables that to a great degree, and also maintaining our person-to-person contact, the quick visit that comes along with the Mishloach Manot package, even if you think of it that way. I think that we definitely will see that in work, and we have lots of people saying, yeah, I'm working just fine remotely, why would I ever go back? Which can be, for many organizations may be possible, but for those that, again, deliver services in person, like human services, or where you have a sizable workforce, you just have to have people present for some things. I think also a reminder also that it is the human interactions that happen at work that are so much an important part of everybody's satisfaction and engagement. And I think it'll take time, but I think we're definitely going to remember or relearn how important that is as well.
I thought you were going to say you wanted to edit Nina's list of essentials to include phones, which my kids definitely would, and I probably would too. But Jacob and Christa, do you think that art and literature and spirituality, do you think that the appreciation for those things has grown as our access to them has either diminished or changed, or what do you think has been the impact of people's understanding of the essentialness of things like art and literature and spirituality? Anyone?
I mean, that's a big question. I think in my personally and for my friends and community, I think this time has forced us to be, to be more creative about where we get nourishment, as Ellie was saying earlier. I also think as a manager and in a work setting, I think one of the things that I've really learned in a deeper way this year is seeing my colleagues as whole people and understanding what they need, what nourishment they need in the workplace and space to have a life outside of the workplace. And I think a lot of us working remotely have, all the conversation about boundaries, where does work end and life begin, and what are the interactions, is a big takeaway. And I think there have been some opportunities, at least for me and my team, this year to sort of learn more about each other as people, and learn how we work, and what nourishes us inside and outside of work.
Just for me jumping in, I think something that's always like just this idea of like what motivates people, right? And I think for us being so heavily involved in education, like we teach a lot of workshops to youth, and echoing what Ariel was saying about just kind of having kids that are millennials that are on their phone a lot, I think it's something that we, or most adults, kind of just say jokingly sometimes, but it's like a real serious issue, just kind of this, what it does to people's mental health, and kind of the depression, the isolation, a lot of these things that are happening. I think for us having a large following online, I always think about this idea of like who you follow, but also, it's not just about what you post, but who you follow, and kind of curating who you follow is such a big part of that. And that kind of subconsciously starts to create the habits that you identify with. If you're following people with bad habits, you're going to eventually start to retain those bad habits or insecurities, et cetera, et cetera. And so this idea of like motivation, it's been hard to be on Zooms with like, 40, 50 kids, and they're all just like at their bed, they're unmotivated, they're down. And I think something that got me into dance, dance doesn't make a lot of money. New York Times just put out a piece. It's like average salary so low, the unemployment rate's the highest. There's no money in dance. Nobody does dance to make money, obviously. So you do it because you're genuinely inspired. And I think if we all just kind of take a second, it's like, what's the last thing that really got you hype? What's the last thing that really inspired you? Oftentimes you're gonna think of an artist, and I think that's like a pretty serious thing. It's like the access to being inspired, kind of then creates that idea of motivation. And I think a lot of us think of that in terms of leadership, in terms of, productivity in a workplace, is like, how do you keep people motivated and inspired? And I think, I don't know where the end of that is, but
well,
yeah,
I'm going to say this is the last time I was inspired. You saying that I am going to try to keep thinking what was the last time I was inspired, and make sure that I keep creating and finding moments of inspiration. It's so important in this, and the length of the pandemic has just made it harder and harder, because it's like I go back and forth between being like, okay, I got this, I'm in my routine, and then being like, oh my God, I cannot do the same thing another day. So remembering to ask yourself, what's the last thing that inspired you? And if it's been a long time, to get busy finding inspiration is really inspiring. So thank you, Jacob, for that. I am going to ask, I want to ask you about politics. Obviously it's the Biden administration. It's in its first 100 days still. And I just would love each of you to give me one super specific thing that either has surprised you so far, or that you're really looking for, that you need this president or this administration to do, to say, whatever it is, but be super specific.
I was at my parents' house in Michigan over December and read an article, and I don't know where it came from, but it might have been local press, about how the last 4 years, the White House has been sort of devoid of emotion, devoid of art and music and family and that sort of vulnerability. And that really changed things, because that is the personification of how we see ourselves. And last week, when the Bidens were on the front lawn of the White House, and there was a Valentine's Day something, and it was just very real and like a warm family moment. And so what I am asking of this administration is that to bring back culture and emotion and inspiration in a way that is not political and has nothing to do with an issue necessarily. I think we all need it collectively.
Great. Ariel, you want to go next?
Sure. Well, JDC is explicitly apolitical and nonpartisan, so it's probably true for all of us. But what I would say especially is that from our perspective, when America is engaged in the world on important issues, better things happen. And so. At JDC, we also do disaster relief and development work around the world. And we're hopeful that, that there will be more of that is helped and facilitated by the American government for the benefit of all people in the world, of course, also Jewish communities in the world.
Jacob?
Yeah, I don't talk too much about politics, but I think in what I will say is that with a lot of the stuff that's been going on in politics, I've been hearing a lot of both sides of both parties. I think for me, separate from policies and politics, I think I'm just really hype about good leadership and good morals and diversity in, the group of who's representing and leading our country. I think just not just diversity in how people look, but where they're from and diversity in thought. And so I think all that's super exciting to me. And just having people being inspired back to that again, just like, yeah, good leadership is super important. So separate from what's productive behind the scenes, I think what the public is being listened to and heard, I think is super important. So I'm excited about
Great. Christa, anything surprising you or something you're looking for to see from
Yeah, I mean, I think as a part of my identity as a historian, an oral historian, I'm looking out for what is the story, what is the story of this time. I think so much that on all sides of it's sort of a cliche to say that the power of the story, but I think, if it's from like conspiracy theories to narrative of liberation, to like Tiger King and the Queen's Gambit, like we've really seen the power of story this year. So I'm curious to see what is this administration, how are they going to be telling us about what's happening, and how are we as a country writing this period, writing the story of this really wild time that we're living through.
That of course resonates with me too. So thank you for that. We are close to out of time. I want to thank everyone again for being with us, and thank Gabby Brooks for hosting this, and Lisa Lepson and Dina Cooperman on the Forward staff for putting it together and running our events programs generally. Remind you that you will get in your email a video and a discount subscription and more information about our next and upcoming events. For my final question, I want to ask everyone on the panel, and I'll invite you also to answer this question for yourselves in the chat, again, to all panelists and attendees. I've been thinking a lot, I mean, honestly, throughout the pandemic, but I think especially as we start to be on the cusp of a real change, people are getting vaccinated, we can see there's starting to be a light at the end of the tunnel, right? We can start to see going back to whether it's work or school or stage. And I've been just thinking a lot about the silver linings, I guess, and the things that happened because of things we never would have chosen, situations we never would have chosen, the ways in which we learned how to do things differently. We created new habits. Many of us spent more time with our children. And I'm really interested in, I've been thinking a lot for myself, and I'm really interested in, for our Forward 50, like what did you start to do in 2020, either in your personal life, your family life, your communal life, your organizational life, whatever, that you're not going to go back. You want to hold on to for 2021, for 2022, maybe forever, a change that you made that that was forced on you by this pandemic, but that you're going to hold on to. super specific, one thing. And we can go maybe in the reverse order: Christa, Jacob, Ariel, and then Ellie. And again, if you have an answer, maybe you took up yoga, maybe you took up knitting, maybe you gave up something, I don't know, and you want to share it in the chat, please do so with all panelist attendees. Go ahead.
Well, it was a pretty stark contrast for me, I think for everyone, but I in the years before the pandemic was on a plane almost every week. I was doing a lot of field work and really traveling internationally and domestically a lot. And so I think for me, the biggest change is really cultivating a relationship to the physical space where I am. I've been hiking all the time. My first quarantine project was to hike all the trails of the mountain range right near me. And I think that connection to land and learning about the history of land is really going to be a lifelong project. And I hope something that I can, bring with me as I hopefully get to return to traveling.
Love that. Jacob?
Yeah, I will echo that. I was actually thinking the same thing, kind of like rethinking what home means. Like, home is not defined by a physical space. I think, for us, we traditionally rehearse in a dance studio. We haven't been able to do that. So we've been rehearsing in garages or different outdoor parks and things like that. And so this idea of redefining what a physical space means, and also kind of what is home, what is family, and just to be able to connect with so many people around the world constantly and have all these Zooms and stay in touch, it really helps you, redefine home and redefine community. So that's super cool.
Ariel?
Well, I got a new job during COVID, and I'm hoping not to do that next year when COVID's over. So that's been an interesting experience that I had, and starting a new job during COVID. And the only other thing that I'll say that will continue is that we realize now that we can be connected to people all over the world in ways that were not imaginable a year ago. And I don't expect to stop that.
Great. Ellie?
A lot of things, for sure. Things slowed down. My kids are doing fewer activities and we're hanging out more, which I appreciate. But in the middle of the pandemic last summer, a new experience happened on Facebook called, it started out being called Jewish Geography Zoom Racing, and now it is called Who Knows When. And it is the craziest conglomeration of Jews who might know each other, and two people compete to find someone. And it has been very fun and very funny, but there is something about seeing your whole life in these people, and actual people kind of pop onto a screen and see folks reconnect. And it has brought this personal element to this moment of isolation that I'm so grateful for. I don't really have any control about whether or not it continues, although I hope it does. But there has been something really valuable and important for me about watching us demonstrate how connected we all are.
Oh, that's so great. Well, thank you all for connecting with us and with our audience today. Thank you, audience, for being with us. It's wonderful to have you as part of the Forward family and to help us celebrate the Forward 50. Again, Christa, Jacob, Ellie, and Ariel, thank you so much for what you do and for being with us and sharing with us. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Jodi. I'm sorry. Thank you all. Great to meet you.